flip the script a little bit, and let's bring in our guy from ESPN, Greg Wyshynski. I hope he's doing a lot better than Jacob Trouba is doing. And also, who else didn't make the teams? Well, he obviously didn't make the team, but John Tavares found out he didn't make the team. Ryan McDonough. I was reading an article on ESPN about, Bill Guerin said, we didn't want to do the Patrick Kane's and Ryan McDonough thing. I'm like, oh my God, I hope they don't.
No, but that's great. Like in the past, in the past, the Team USA management has shown such fealty towards having the veterans make the roster and feeling this sort of sense of dedication to the older generations of American players that have come through. By the way, they've won squat, but they've come through and paid their dues. So the fact that they skewed a little bit younger was I think good and a necessity, because it was all about this generation of players. We've been waiting, it seems like a decade, to see Austin Matthews, Jack Hughes, the Kachucks all come up and be part of Team USA. The real intrigue was that they did the other thing that other Team USA management groups have done, which is to feel the need to have role players in the roster. So you get your Vincent Trocheck on the roster instead of a Cole Caulfield or a Tage Thompson or a guy who I thought was really going to make it because I figured he could play down in the bottom six and be adaptable. Clayton Keller of the Utah Hockey Club. Like, I thought that there were some young players they could have put into those roles, but I do understand when it's a short tournament, you're building for a 3 or 4 game stretch, and you might have to play Canada twice. Like, I understand the idea of having some veterans on the roster that can maybe do some of the dirty work that you don't want to ask a guy who's a top line offensive player to all of a sudden change his stripes and do for you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like 2-3 weeks ago, you're seeing all these projections for Team Canada. And then like 2 weeks ago, it's like, well, Anthony Cirelli and Brandon Hagel might be on the roster. And then I'm looking in the locker and I'm looking at Cirelli and I'm going, dude, that could be the fourth line center at Team Canada. And the groundswell. And of course, we know with Coop being the head coach, he knows what he gets from those two guys.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like, Canada's trying to do the same thing. Like, they didn't take Tavares, they took Anthony Cirelli. So, I mean, it's going to be unique to see how these coaches not only utilize the roster, but also deploy these guys in game situations.
Yeah. And I think I wonder if the Cirelli, I didn't write about this yesterday. I graded out all the rosters, USA, Canada, Sweden, Finland, and then also covered the surprises and the snubs. It's on ESPN.com if you want to read it. I didn't bring this up, but I meant to, which is, I wonder if the Cirelli thing is directly related to them no longer having Patrice Bergeron on the roster. Like, when you had Patrice Bergeron on Team Canada, like, there's your first or second line center, probably second line considering Sid was there, but also a guy that you could throw out as your defensive stopper. So you didn't need an Anthony Cirelli. You didn't need a fourth line defensive center when you had Bergeron on the roster. So I think him retiring and leaving that space open on Team Canada directly led to someone like Cirelli making the roster to have the shutdown defensive center that Bergeron always was for Team Canada for like 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember last year in Toronto, and everybody's asking like Pasternak and Draisaitl, all these other guys, like, what do you think about the Four Nations? They're like, we don't care, we're not playing. I mean, it is weird to think, like, standing there on the ice at Amalie Arena and looking at Victor Hedman, like, oh, he's going, and then looking at Nikita Kucherov and Andrei Vasilevsky going, well, they're gonna have some time off. Is it a little weird that, like, I understand like what's going on in the world, but is it weird that some of the best players in the league will not be participating in this?
But it's not, though, because like you said, it's about what's going on in the world, and it wasn't the NHL and the NHLPA that necessarily was like, we don't want Russians here. It was Finland and Sweden and other countries that were going to potentially participate in a World Cup saying, look, as Vladimir Putin is marching through Ukraine towards us, like, we'd rather not participate in a tournament that involves these guys. And so there was a lot of pressure initially on how to handle the Russian situation. And ultimately it was to just leave them out. And in the process, leave out the Czechs, leave out the Swiss, leave out other countries that would have been part of a World Cup. I guess the only weird part about it for me, and I understand why they did it, because they didn't simply want it to be this narrow. But the tournament exists for two reasons. It exists to try to get people excited for 2026 when the NHL goes back to the Winter Olympics in Italy. And then it exists so USA can play Canada. Let's be honest. Like, there is a game at Bell Center on a Saturday night that is going to be a massive, massive deal for hockey, crossing over to casual fans. Casual fans in the United States who don't watch hockey know two things. They know three things: the Stanley Cup, gritty, and USA versus Canada. And so we're going to get that once, maybe twice in this tournament. The weird part about it for me is like, why not just make it a Ryder Cup? Like, why not just have like 3 games between USA and Canada and not involve Sweden or Finland? But I guess when there's that much money in international broadcast rights, when you do get the opportunity to have Barkov and Hedman and you know, Pettersson and all these big Swedish players in the tournament as well, like you want to capitalize on that. But this is all about the USA and Canada. This is all about McDavid versus Matthews and all of these generational talents facing each other for the first time.
Yeah, people in Tampa are very conflicted, going, what team do we root for? Like,
I'm conflicted.
Yeah, it's like, what the hell is going on here? Like, hey, you're gonna have to root against Cooper, Cirelli, Hagel if you're, you know, true American down here in the Bay Area. Before we get to Lightning Talk, let's get to the number one story today in the National Hockey League and what's going on with Jacob Trouba and the Rangers. As a kid that grew up on Long Island, I was rooting for the Rangers. I had a feeling that this was going to go sideways, Greg, in the offseason when you're trying to trade your captain. And, you know, I got a chance to be very close and be friends with Ryan Callahan down here when he got traded. And speaking to him through the entire process, he's like, Jay, it's like, you can't describe it. You know, you think you're going to be a Ranger for life. And then all of a sudden I'm having a conversation about why Ryan McDonough is going to be the next captain for the team, right? Like, it's crazy. Like, you don't even think about things like that. But you had to know the writings on the wall when Trouba, they're talking about trading the captain. Like, how can you be successful as a team when it seems like they don't want the guy that's supposed to be your leader on the squad? Like, that's not a recipe. It's hard enough to win in the National Hockey League when you have all of those guys set in place. But when you have your leadership, and it doesn't seem like Mika or Chris Kreider want anything to do with being the captain or anything to do with when things go wrong, taking responsibility. And then Trouba's like, all right, well, I'll step up, but people don't even want him there. It's weird for a team has such a collection of talent, but they're just so discombobulated. How do you think this thing ends?
Well, the vibes were off. I don't think it's necessarily them trying to trade Trouba. Like, the guys in that locker room and in any NHL locker room know inherently it's a business. And so, you know, you do your business, which is to get trade protection in your contract, which Trouba did. He's got a 15-team no trade clause, had a full no movement clause before July 1st. So he did his business and was able to kind of impact what they wanted to do with him in the summer. But then when they don't find a way to trade him or don't find a way to get him off the roster, well, now you have this festering wound in your locker room. And I think the dark cloud has been over Trouba all season. He got 6 assists. He's a minus player. He's playing 20 minutes a night. He's not been himself. Like, when's the last big Trouba hit you remember this season? I don't think there's been one. You combine that with the way they handled Barclay Goodrow, a guy that obviously Lightning fans know pretty well. 3 years left in his contract. They said, we want to trade you. He's like, I don't think so. And then they're like, all right, you're on waivers. And by the way, San Jose is claiming you. No contract for Shesterkin. You know, just a lot of really bad vibes things that happen with this team in the offseason. And then at the minute they hit a skid this year, losing, I think it's like 7 out of 8 in regulation. Then everything kind of starts to spiral, and they send out the memo saying everybody's available, mentioning Trouba, mentioning Chris Kreider. And now we come to today where Trouba, for those that don't know, Trouba's not playing tonight against the Penguins for roster management reasons, which essentially means that there you have a bunch of trades on the table for him, and he's going to have to pick one. And if he doesn't pick one, then he's going to get the Barclay Goodrow treatment.
It's crazy. I mean, just in a guy like Chris Kreider, I know he mentioned today that he's not going to talk about the whole Trouba thing or Team USA until later. I mean, I also want to point out that I don't know if Kreider's really been the same since I posted that picture of him picking hats off of his front lawn that went viral during the playoffs. Shout out to your ESPN compatriots that completely spelled mine. I don't know who Jay Recher is, but yeah, close enough. Emily showed me some love, so I was pretty happy about that. But yeah,
I mean, in fairness, they barely spell my name correctly, and I've worked there since 2017. Now, granted, I think mine's a little bit more complicated than yours.
It is.
It's just, it happens.
100%, man. So, I mean, let's say he does get moved. To where do you think he would go?
I still think Detroit is probably the most logical destination. That was where he was rumored to be going in the offseason. It didn't come to fruition. They're clearly a team that needs a big shakeup themselves. I think they could certainly use a veteran like him on their blue line, and they might have to move a few things around on their cap to make it work. But he's the kind of veteran leadership type that I think that team could use. What's fascinating about that, though, is I wonder if order to make the money work, they end up sending Patrick Kane back to the Rangers.
Wow.
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that could be something that we see to make the money work. And then also, don't forget, one of the problems with the Rangers right now is the ineffectiveness and the unhappiness of Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. Well, Patrick Kane was their winger when he was there after they signed him like mid-season a couple seasons ago after his big hip surgery. And I thought he played pretty well with them. So I wonder, it'd be kind of amazing if Trouba goes out and then Kane comes back and the Rangers attempt to solve a problem that they've had with their top line. In meanwhile, kind of clearing out a player they no longer want in Trouba.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to see, where that could, end up going with Trouba. It's like, you don't always see your captains get traded unless you're a captain of the New York Rangers. Then really nothing's off the table. Speaking of captains, what's going on with my buddy Stamkos and the Predators out there, Greg? I mean, I watch their games and it just you'll go get a drink, you come back, they're down 2-0. It's just like they can't get out of their own way. I was looking at this team going, holy smoke, Shea, Marchessault, Stamkos. I'm a huge Roman Josi. I love Ryan O'Reilly. We saw what he did for Toronto a couple years ago against the Lightning in that first round. He like single-handedly helped get them over the hump out of their first round demons. But man, anything that could go wrong seems like it's gone wrong. They've got the goalie. Is it Brunette? Is it like, what is it? Is it a bad, combination with these guys? Because it's not working.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of like spiraled to the point where now the pressure is unbearable in trying to make the offensive work. I mean, UC Saros has been all right. I don't think it's necessarily on him. Defensively, this team was never all that great, but it certainly hasn't helped their cause this year. The problem's the offense, which I think is the worst in the league right now, which is insane when you think about them adding Stamkos and Marchessault to an Andrew Brunette team that did pretty well offensively. I think they were around top 10 last year in goals per game. So the only thing I could tell you is that sometimes it's really hard to graft someone else's DNA onto your own. It sounds like a Michael Crichton novel all of a sudden. But,
we got James Patterson down here.
So you're taking Stamkos, you're taking Marchessault, you're putting them on a team that plays a specific offensive style. You've got a bunch of younger guys there. They did pretty well for themselves. And the pieces just don't fit for whatever reason. The power play malfunctions. You're losing games. You're not scoring. You're last in the league in offense. And I just think it got to a point where now, like, everyone's gripping their stick. Like, there's no clear way out of it. And I guess the only glimmer of hope for them, and the reason I don't think that they've necessarily punted on the season, is that this is a team that put together the best winning streak of the season last year. Like after they were told they couldn't go see U2 at the Sphere in Vegas, they cracked off like 17 games where they were unbeatable, and it catapulted them into the playoffs. So knowing that the team has the potential to do that, I think is probably keeping the flame lit that this could be a salvageable season. But otherwise, I mean, it is a disaster. There's no bigger disaster this season than the Nashville Predators.
Greg, what are your thoughts from where you sit I know we got a chance to catch up a couple of weeks ago at Amalie, but from afar, what have you seen from the Lightning other than the 8-1 drubbing last night? Everybody that made the Four Nations seems to want to score goals, but from afar, and winning that game also without Nikita Kucherov, which is a nice thing. But from what you see, what can you tell us about the Bolts?
Yeah, I mean, this pedal down offense that they've had this season, where I think that last glance, second of the league in goals per game, obviously scoring 8 kind of helps out that average a little bit, but they've just been so impressive offensively. That top line obviously hasn't missed a beat with the personnel change. Hagel's had an incredibly effective season, and they're getting contributions throughout. For me, that's the biggest story. I think defensively, they probably still have a little bit of work to do. But they've really asserted themselves early in a division where obviously, Florida's doing Florida things. Toronto's been great, even without Matthews, to be as good as they've been. And now Boston's kind of seemingly figured themselves out after firing Montgomery under their interim coach, Joe Sacco. So again, the top 4 in the division remain the top 4 in the division. But I think the Lightning have done a good job of banking some points early in what's still a pretty competitive space in the Atlantic.
Greg, before I let you go, I got to ask you a wrestling question. Come on, buddy. You know the deal. What is the next step in the bloodline narrative, and what do you think the favor is that CM Punk is going to ask from Paul Heyman?
Well, don't you think it's a take on Roman? Like, it has to be, right?
Maybe I think it's too obvious though, man. I think it might be a little bit too obvious where it's like, all right, it's gonna be the last two guys in the Royal Rumble, and Paul's gonna be like, shake my hand and then pull him over, kind of like what we saw in the Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, Sid Royal Rumble back in the day.
But you talk about obvious, like Heyman turning to help CM Punk is. I mean, you might as well take out a Times Square billboard at this point. It's so obvious. Like, I mean, like we all anticipate that's going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen, because it'd be quite satisfying to see that be the way that they go with it. But I don't know. I did the Lapsed Fans Guide to Survivor Series, and that helped me catch up on some of the insanely complicated familial things that have happened in that rivalry and in the Bloodline feud over the last several months. It's still a very compelling story. I am at that point, though. Don't you kind of feel a little NWO Black and White, NWO Wolfpack right now with this story? Like where is it all going? How is it going to resolve? We've split it up. They're feuding. I'm intrigued to see. I mean, the Punk stuff could obviously spice this thing up, and then you can circle back eventually to Roman and Cody. But like, we're at a point where I'm like, all right, I hope that we have some plan in place here, because it could get a little unwieldy if not.
Yeah, you're right. We're like 2 steps away from seeing, was it Scott Norton fighting Conan for the Battle of Black and White and Black and Red Supremacy. I'm just waiting for this edition's version of Sting coming out and going, "Oh yeah, I'm joining the Black and White," and then tear off his shirt and joining Luger in the Black and Red.
There's a proud tradition of Rhodes family members making ill-advised heel turns in the NWO feud. So we'll see what happens.
You got that right. Greg Wyshynski, ESPN, Wyshynski on Twitter/X. Greg, I appreciate it. I know you're a busy man. Thank you for your time. Be well, my friend.
Anything for you, man. Take care.
All right.